The suspenseful hook. The dim lights of the galactic marketplace flickered ominously, casting eerie shadows across the rows of makeshift stalls. The air was thick with tension, a blend of alien languages, metallic smells, and the faint hum of energy weapons holstered by guards. Nathan stood at the edge of it all, his jaw tight, his hand resting on the worn handle of his sidearm. He was no stranger to shady deals, but this one felt different. Nathan wasn't a hero. He was just a human trying to survive in a galaxy that cared little for his kind. The job was simple, or so he had been told. Transport the cargo discreetly, no questions asked. The payout was enough to keep his crumbling ship running for years, enough to finally leave the dangerous markets behind. But as the cargo arrived, Nathan felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The cargo wasn't goods or weapons. It was a woman, an alien widow named Valsera, and her young son. Their hands were bound, their faces pale with fear. Valsera's shimmering green skin, marked with faint glowing patterns, spoke of a proud and noble lineage. Her wide, amber eyes darted around, looking for an escape that wasn't there. The boy clung to her side, trembling, his small hands gripping her torn cloak. Nathan tried to mask his reaction. He had dealt with odd jobs before, but this was the first time he had been asked to transport living beings. Is this some kind of joke? He muttered to the handler, a gruff alien with jagged horns and a cruel smirk. No joke, human, the handler sneered. The buyer is paying a fortune for them. You deliver them, you get your cut. No complications. Nathan's instincts screamed at him to back out, but he needed the money, and he had already accepted half the payment. There was no turning back without consequences. As Valsera and her son were shoved toward him, her eyes locked onto his. For a moment, he saw something that unsettled him. Hope. It wasn't the desperate hope of escape, but a quiet, unshakable belief that he wouldn't hurt them. Get them on the ship, the handler barked, snapping Nathan out of his thoughts. And remember, no detours. The buyer doesn't like delays. Nathan nodded, gripping the datapad with the coordinates of their destination. He led Valsera and her son toward his ship, the Echo Runner, a rusty freighter that had seen better days. The boy stumbled, and Valsera caught him, whispering soothing words in her native tongue. Nathan heard the fear in her voice, but he also caught the unmistakable tone of a mother's love. As they reached the loading bay, Nathan hesitated. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting the handler to be watching. Instead, he saw the bustling chaos of the marketplace, a place where morality was a weakness and survival was the only rule. He sighed and gestured for them to follow him inside. The Echo Runner's interior was as worn as its exterior. Nathan motioned for them to sit in the small cargo hold, handing them a blanket he kept for emergencies. "Stay here. Don't touch anything," he said gruffly, trying to ignore the boy's wide, fearful eyes. "Please," Valsera whispered, her voice soft and melodic. "Don't let them take my son. I will do anything you ask, but spare him." Her words froze Nathan in place. He had heard pleas before, but something about hers cut through him like a blade. Maybe it was the way she clutched her son, shielding him with her body. Maybe it was the way she spoke, not with desperation, but with quiet determination. "This isn't my problem," Nathan muttered, more to himself than to her. He turned away, heading for the cockpit, but her voice followed him. "You have a choice," she said. "You don't have to be like them." Nathan slammed the door shut, cutting off her words. He sank into the pilot's seat, his hands trembling slightly. "Just get it done," he muttered. Activating the ship's systems, the engines roared to life, and the Echo Runner lifted off, leaving the market behind. As the stars stretched into the infinite void of space, Nathan couldn't shake Valsera's words. The datapad on his console blinked with the coordinates of their destination, a sector notorious for its cruel trade in sentient beings. He knew what would happen to them if he delivered them. The widow and her son would be sold, used, discarded. He knew it wasn't his business, but something deep inside him churned. His mind flashed back to his own past, to the family he had lost, to the choices he regretted. He gritted his teeth, trying to push the memories away. But Valsera's eyes, her words, refused to leave him. In the cargo hold, Valsera held her son close, whispering a silent prayer. She didn't know if Nathan could be trusted, but she had seen a flicker of humanity in his gaze. It was a gamble, but it was the only one she had. Nathan stared at the blinking coordinates. His hand hovered over the controls. All he had to do was follow the path, drop them off, and collect his pay. It was simple, but as the seconds ticked by, he realized something. He couldn't do it. The Echo runner veered off course, heading into the unknown. Nathan knew he had just made a dangerous choice, one that could cost him everything. But for the first time in years, he felt like he was doing something right. The backstory and conflict. The Echo runner drifted through the quiet void of space, its engines humming steadily. Inside the cockpit, Nathan leaned back in his chair, staring at the blinking lights on the console. His mind was restless, battling the weight of his decision to go off course. Delivering Valsera and her son would have been easy. A clean job, simple money. But now, he was heading into uncertainty, dragging 2 lives along with him. In the cargo hold, Valsera sat huddled with her son, her arms wrapped protectively around him. The boy's small fingers clung to her cloak as if it were a lifeline. For hours, they had sat in silence, broken only by the occasional hum of the ship's systems. Finally, Valsera spoke, her voice low and cautious. "Why did you choose this life?" she asked, not expecting an answer. Nathan appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed. "You wouldn't understand," he replied. His tone was guarded, almost defensive. "Try me," she said softly. "I've seen more than you think." Nathan sighed and stepped closer. He crouched near them, his sharp gaze meeting hers. For a moment, the walls he had built around himself seemed to crack. "I didn't choose it. It chose me," he said. "When you've lost everything, you stop caring about what's right and wrong. You just survive." Valsera studied him, her eyes filled with a mix of sympathy and curiosity. "And what did you lose?" she asked. Nathan's jaw tightened, but before he could answer, the boy spoke up. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Nathan blinked, taken aback by the question. "Nathan," he said after a pause. "What's yours?" "Cale," the boy said, his grip on his mother's cloak loosening slightly. "Are you a bad guy?" The question hit Nathan like a punch to the gut. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, he stood abruptly and walked back to the cockpit, leaving Valsera and Cale in the silence once again. Valsera's story. Hours later, Valsera decided it was her turn to speak. She approached the cockpit cautiously, her son staying behind in the cargo hold. Nathan didn't look up as she entered, his hands busy with the ship's controls. "My husband was a soldier," she began, her voice steady despite the pain laced within it. "He fought to protect our people when the invaders came. They wanted our resources, our lands, and when we resisted, they burned everything." Nathan glanced at her, his expression unreadable. She continued, "We were driven underground, hiding like animals. My husband stayed behind to hold them off while I escaped with Cale. He didn't survive." Nathan felt a twinge of guilt as he listened. He had seen war before, but hearing it from someone who had lived through such devastation stirred something in him. "And now you're being hunted," he said, more a statement than a question. Valsera nodded. "Cale isn't just my son. He's the last hope of my people. If they capture him, it's over. Our species will vanish." Nathan rubbed his temples, frustration building. "And you expect me to fix this? I'm just a smuggler, not a hero." Valsera's gaze hardened. "I don't expect anything from you. But you made a choice, and choices have consequences." Nathan struggled. Alone in the cockpit later, Nathan wrestled with his thoughts. He had always told himself he wasn't responsible for the galaxy's problems. He was just one man, doing what he had to do to survive. But Valsera's words haunted him. Her story reminded him of his own losses, the family he had failed to protect, the life he had abandoned when survival became his only goal. He stared at the blinking coordinates on the screen, the destination he was supposed to reach. If he turned back now, he could still salvage the job. But deep down, he knew he wouldn't. He couldn't. Suddenly, an alarm blared, breaking his train of thought. A proximity warning flashed on the console. "Damn it," Nathan muttered, quickly scanning the radar. 3 small ships were closing in fast. The conflict escalates. Nathan grabbed the intercom and shouted, "Brace yourselves. We've got company." In the cargo hold, Valsera pulled Cal close, her heart pounding. Nathan's voice echoed through the ship. "Looks like your friends aren't ready to let you go." The pursuing ships opened fire, bright streaks of energy slicing through the void. Nathan maneuvered the Echo Runner with practiced skill, dodging the blasts as best he could. The freighter wasn't built for combat, but Nathan had added a few modifications over the years. He flipped a switch, activating the ship's rear cannons. The first enemy ship exploded in a fiery burst, but the others pressed on, relentless. "Hold on," Nathan shouted as he dived the ship into a nearby asteroid field. The jagged rocks provided cover, but navigating them at high speeds was a gamble. In the cargo hold, Cal whimpered, clutching his mother tightly. Valsera whispered soothing words, though fear gripped her as well. Nathan's voice crackled through the intercom again. "You might want to start praying." The tension builds. As the Echo Runner weaved through the asteroid field, Nathan's focus was razor-sharp. He had no room for doubt, no time to second-guess. The second enemy ship clipped an asteroid and exploded, leaving only one pursuer. Nathan saw an opening and took it, pulling the ship into a sharp turn and firing the rear cannons. The final enemy ship erupted into flames, disappearing into the void. For a moment, there was silence. Nathan exhaled, his hands trembling as he gripped the controls. "We're clear," he said over the intercom. In the cargo hold, Valsera closed her eyes, relief washing over her. Cale looked up at her, his small voice breaking the silence. "Is it over?" "For now," she replied, pulling him into a tight embrace. Back in the cockpit, Nathan stared out at the stars, his mind racing. He had just made himself a target, not only for the people who hired him, but for anyone looking to cash in on the bounty that would surely follow. But as the Echo Runner sped into the unknown, Nathan knew one thing for certain. There was no turning back now. The escape plan. Nathan sat in the cockpit of the Echo Runner, staring out at the endless expanse of stars. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, doubts, and growing guilt. He hadn't signed up for this, a life-threatening mission to save an alien widow and her child. Yet here he was, far off course, with pursuers hot on their trail and no clear destination in mind. He tapped the console impatiently, the ship's hum the only sound in the room. In the cargo hold, Valsera comforted Cale, her fingers gently running through his hair as she hummed a soft, calming melody in her native tongue. The boy clung to her, his wide eyes betraying the terror he couldn't yet put into words. Valsera's gaze lifted to the cargo bay doors. She wasn't sure if she could trust Nathan, but she had no choice. His actions so far had kept them alive, though she knew it wasn't out of kindness alone. The intercom crackled to life. "We need to talk," Nathan's gruff voice echoed. "Get up here." Valsera stood, steadying Cale before walking to the cockpit. Nathan didn't look up as she entered, his focus fixed on the navigation display. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the rigid way he sat, as if carrying the weight of the universe. "Got any ideas on where we're going?" Nathan asked, his tone sharp but not unkind. Valsera hesitated. "There's a resistance outpost in the Martha Nebula," she said. "If we can reach it, they'll protect us." Nathan scoffed. "The Martha Nebula. That place is a death trap. Pirates, radiation storms, Rogues. You want me to take this rust bucket through that? Valsera's jaw tightened. Do you have a better idea? They'll keep coming until they catch us, Nathan. At least the resistance has resources, people who can fight back. Nathan finally turned to look at her. And what happens to me after that? You think your resistance buddies are gonna welcome me with open arms? I'm a smuggler, Valsera, not a hero. They'll shoot me on sight. They won't, she said firmly. I'll vouch for you. You're risking your life to save us. That has to mean something. Nathan sighed and leaned back in his chair. Fine, he muttered. But if we don't make it out alive, don't say I didn't warn you. Preparing for the journey. The next few hours were a blur of preparation. Nathan scavenged what little weaponry he had aboard the eco-runner, inspecting each piece with a practiced eye. Valsera helped where she could, though she kept Cal close, sensing his growing anxiety. The boy watched Nathan with a mix of awe and curiosity, his small voice breaking the silence. Are you going to fight the bad guys? Cale asked. Nathan paused, looking down at the child. I'll do what I have to, he said simply. Cale tilted his head. Why? You don't even know us. Nathan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he knelt to Cal's level. Let's just say I owe someone, he said quietly. Someone I couldn't save a long time ago. Valsera watched the exchange, a flicker of understanding crossing her face. Nathan wasn't just running from danger. He was running from his past. She decided not to press further. The plan unfolds. As they approached the outskirts of the Marthan Nebula, Nathan explained his plan. The nebula is a mess of sensor interference and debris. If we're lucky, it'll hide us from anyone tracking us. But it's also going to make navigation a nightmare. Valsera nodded. What do you need me to do? Nathan gestured to a secondary console. I need you to monitor the proximity sensors. If anything gets too close, I need to know before it rams us. And me? Cale asked, his voice small but determined. Nathan gave a faint smirk. You stay out of trouble, kid. That's your job. Cale pouted but stayed quiet as Nathan guided the ship into the swirling chaos of the nebula. The stars outside vanished, replaced by glowing clouds of gas and jagged rocks drifting aimlessly. The ship's sensors flickered and beeped, struggling to make sense of their surroundings. Obstacles in the nebula. The journey through the nebula was anything but smooth. Nathan's hands flew across the controls, narrowly avoiding collisions with rogue debris. The ship jolted violently as a sudden radiation surge fried one of the secondary systems. Great, Nathan muttered. We just lost the rear shields. Valsera's fingers danced over the console, her eyes scanning the sensor readouts. There's something out there, she said, her voice tense. It's moving fast. Nathan cursed under his breath. Pirates. They must have picked up our trail. The Echo Runner's comm system crackled as a harsh voice came through. Unidentified vessel, surrender your cargo, and we'll let you live. Resist, and you'll be space dust. Nathan didn't respond. Instead, he pushed the engines to their limits, the ship lurching forward. Hold on, he yelled. The pirates opened fire, plasma bolts streaking through the nebula. Nathan dodged and weaved, using the interference from the nebula to his advantage. The ship rattled under the strain, warning lights flashing across the console. A desperate gamble. We can't outrun them forever. Valsera shouted over the chaos. Nathan gritted his teeth. We don't have to. See that cluster of debris up ahead? If we time it right, we can use it to take them out. Valsera's eyes widened. That's insane. Got a better idea? Nathan snapped. She didn't. Fine. What do you need? Just trust me, Nathan said, steering the ship into the debris field. The pirates followed, their ships nimble, but no match for Nathan's desperate maneuvering. He led them into the densest part of the field, where massive chunks of rock and metal drifted dangerously close. Now, Nathan shouted, slamming a button on the console. The Echo Runner's remaining rear cannons fired, blasting a large piece of debris toward the pursuing ships. The pirates tried to evade, but the debris field was unforgiving. One ship was crushed instantly, while the others veered off, retreating. A small victory. The Echo Runner emerged from the nebula battered but intact. Nathan let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding, his hand shaking slightly as he eased the ship back into normal space. "We made it," Valsera said, relief evident in her voice. "For now," Nathan replied. He turned to look at her and Cale, exhaustion etched on his face. "But this is far from over." Cale looked up at him with wide eyes. "Are you a hero now?" Nathan hesitated, then shook his head. "No, kid, just a guy trying to do the right thing." As the Echo Runner set course for the Resistance outpost, Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. He had made his choice, and there was no turning back now. The chase begins. The Echo Runner emerged from the swirling chaos of the Martha Nebula, its hull scorched and engines sputtering. Inside, Nathan's fingers flew over the console, trying to coax more speed from the aging freighter. The ship's systems groaned in protest, warning lights flashing across the dashboard like a chorus of alarms. Valsera clutched Cal tightly in the cargo hold, her heart pounding. The boy's wide eyes darted between the walls, his small hands gripping his mother's arm. "Are they still coming?" he asked, his voice trembling. Nathan's voice crackled over the intercom. "Not yet. But don't get comfortable. They'll be back." The Hunter's arrival. Nathan's prediction proved correct. No sooner had they left the nebula than the ship's proximity alarms blared. He glanced at the radar and cursed under his breath. A sleek, black ship appeared on the screen, flanked by two smaller fighters. These weren't the usual band of pirates. They were professionals, bounty hunters sent by the same employer Nathan had betrayed. "They'd got a lock on us," Nathan muttered. His voice over the intercom was grim. "We're about to have company." Valsera's face paled. "Can't we outrun them?" Nathan's laugh was humorless. "Not in this bucket of bolts, but I've got a few tricks up my sleeve." The pursuit. The Echo Runner shuddered as the first salvo of plasma bolts streaked past. Missing by inches, Nathan threw the ship into an erratic series of maneuvers, using every ounce of his experience to stay ahead of the hunters. The bounty ships moved in perfect formation, their pilots coordinated and relentless. "You've got to be kidding me," Nathan muttered, adjusting the trajectory. "These guys are good." In the cargo hold, Cal whimpered, burying his face in Valsera's shoulder. She stroked his hair, her own fear kept tightly in check. "Stay with me, Cal. Nathan won't let them catch us." The ship rocked violently as a bolt struck the rear shields. Sparks flew from the console in the cockpit, and Nathan growled in frustration. "We're not going to last long like this." A desperate plan. Nathan's mind raced. The Echo Runner was outmatched in every way: speed, firepower, maneuverability. But he knew one thing the hunters didn't: the ship's hidden systems. Over the years, he'd made modifications to his freighter, adding traps and decoys for moments just like this. Flipping a series of switches, Nathan activated the ship's decoy pods, small, reflective devices launched from the Echo Runner, scattering in all directions. On the hunter's sensors, they appeared as identical targets, confusing their lock-on systems. "Let's see how smart you really are," Nathan muttered, steering the ship into a sharp dive. The hunters hesitated, their formation breaking as they tried to reacquire their target. Nathan took the opportunity to swing the Echo Runner into a dense asteroid field, the ship weaving through jagged rocks at breakneck speed. "Are you insane?" Valsera's voice came through the intercom, panicked. "Probably," Nathan shot back, narrowly dodging a massive chunk of debris. "But if we stay in open space, we're dead." The hunter strikes back. The bounty hunters weren't so easily shaken. The lead ship fired a precision blast, destroying several decoy pods and recalibrating its targeting systems. It surged forward, closing the gap between them and the Echo Runner. "They're gaining on us. Valsera shouted, holding Cal tightly as the ship lurched. Nathan gritted his teeth. Hang on. I've got one more trick. He steered the Echo Runner toward a massive asteroid with a hollowed-out center, its cavernous interior visible through the scanners. It was a gamble, but it was the only option. Nathan fired the ship's remaining thrusters, plunging into the asteroid's gaping maw. Inside, the darkness was almost absolute, the ship's lights casting eerie shadows on the jagged walls. The hunters followed, their smaller ships navigating the tight space with ease. Nathan's hand shook as he guided the Echo Runner through the narrow passage, every turn a potential death trap. Come on, he muttered, his eyes darting between the scanners and the viewport. The ambush. As they reached the center of the asteroid, Nathan hit the brakes, the Echo Runner grinding to a halt. He activated the ship's proximity mines, small explosive devices he had scattered earlier in their path. The hunters, confident in their pursuit, didn't notice until it was too late. The mines detonated in rapid succession, the explosions rocking the asteroid. The two smaller bounty ships were caught in the blast, disintegrating instantly. The lead ship managed to evade the worst of it, but was heavily damaged, its systems sparking as it struggled to maintain control. Nathan seized the opportunity, firing the Echo Runner's last missile. The projectile struck the lead ship directly, obliterating it in a fiery burst. A moment of respite. Silence fell as the Echo Runner drifted out of the asteroid, its systems battered but functional. Nathan slumped in his seat, his chest heaving as he caught his breath. In the cargo hold, Valsera and Cal sat in stunned silence. Cal was the first to speak, his voice small but awestruck. Did we win? Valsera smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from his face. For now, she said, her voice soft. Nathan's voice came over the intercom, weary but triumphant. We're clear, but don't start celebrating yet. They'll send more. Valsera closed her eyes, relief washing over her even as her fear lingered. Thank you, she whispered, though she wasn't sure if Nathan could hear her. The chase isn't over. As the Echo Runner powered toward the resistance outpost, Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that this victory was temporary. The hunters had been skilled, but whoever had sent them wouldn't stop with one team. He glanced at the photo taped to the edge of his console, a reminder of the family he had lost, and the guilt that drove him. This isn't over, he muttered to himself, setting the ship's course. Not by a long shot. In the cargo hold, Valsera watched her son sleep, her heart heavy with both gratitude and worry. She knew the dangers weren't behind them yet, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. Discovering the truth. The Echo Runner drifted through the quiet of deep space, the tension on board thick and unspoken. Nathan sat in the cockpit, his gaze fixed on the endless stars ahead. He could feel the weight of his decision pressing down on him. They had narrowly escaped the bounty hunters, but he knew that wouldn't be the end of it. Whoever wanted Valsera and her son wasn't going to stop. The cockpit door slid open, and Valsera stepped in quietly. She looked tired, the stress of their ordeal etched into her face. Her son, Cal, had finally fallen asleep after hours of clinging to her side. She stood for a moment, watching Nathan at the controls. "You haven't slept," she said softly. "Didn't know you were keeping tabs on me," Nathan replied, his tone gruff but not unfriendly. He didn't look at her, his focus still on the stars. "You should rest. Even you can't outrun exhaustion," she said, sitting in the co-pilot's seat. Nathan sighed. "I'll rest when we're safe. Right now, I got to keep this bucket running and keep us alive." Valsera studied him for a moment. "Why are you doing this, Nathan? You don't know us, and you had no reason to change course. You could have just delivered us and walked away." Nathan hesitated, his hand hovering over the console. He finally leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "Because I've seen what happens when people like you get sold off," he admitted. "I've seen what they do to families, and I wasn't about to let that happen again." A painful truth. Valsera nodded, sensing there was more to his words. "You've lost someone, haven't you?" she asked gently. Nathan's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. But then he spoke, his voice low and filled with pain. "I had a family once. A wife. A little girl. We were on a colony near the outer rim. Quiet, peaceful. Until the war came." Valsera listened silently, her heart aching as he continued. "They evacuated us, but not fast enough. My wife got sick from the fallout. My daughter. She didn't make it to the med station in time." His voice broke slightly, and he clenched his fists. "I couldn't save them. And I've been running ever since, trying to forget." Valsera placed a hand on his arm, her touch gentle. "I'm sorry, Nathan. No one should have to endure that kind of loss." He shook his head. "Doesn't matter now. What matters is keeping you and the kids safe. I'm not letting history repeat itself." The secret of Kale. Valsera hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Nathan, there's something you need to know. Kale, he's not just my son. He's the last hope of my people." Nathan frowned. "What do you mean?" She leaned forward, her voice lowering. "Our species is on the brink of extinction. The invaders didn't just destroy our cities, they targeted our biology. A bioweapon wiped out most of our population's ability to reproduce. Kale is different. He's immune. The scientists called him a genetic anomaly, a miracle." Nathan's eyes widened. "So that's why they're after you. They think they can use him." Valsera nodded. "If they capture him, they'll experiment on him, try to replicate his immunity. But it won't be to save lives. They'll weaponize it, turn it into leverage against the galaxy." Nathan leaned back in his chair, the gravity of her words sinking in. "And the resistance. They think they can protect him. They're our only chance," she said. "But I won't lie to you, Nathan. Even with their help, this won't end here. The people hunting us, they won't stop. Not until they get what they want." Nathan's dilemma. Nathan stood and paced the small cockpit, his mind racing. He had thought this was just another job gone wrong, but now it felt like he was at the center of something much bigger, something far beyond his understanding. He glanced back at Valsera, her face a mixture of determination and desperation. "This isn't just about you anymore," he said finally. "If what you're saying is true, then Kale isn't just your son. He's a target for the entire galaxy." Valsera nodded. "That's why I need your help, Nathan. I can't do this alone." Nathan sighed, running a hand over his face. "You're asking a lot, you know that." "I know," she said softly, "but you're the only one who stood by us, and I believe you can do the right thing." Nathan sat back down, staring at the controls. He didn't respond immediately, but Valsera could see the conflict in his eyes. Finally, he spoke. "I'll get you to the resistance, but after that, I don't know." Kale's role. Later, as the ship cruised through the void, Kale woke and wandered into the cockpit. He climbed into Valsera's lap, his small hands rubbing his sleepy eyes. "Are we safe now?" he asked, his voice filled with innocent hope. Nathan turned to look at him, his gaze softening. "For now, kid, but we've got a long way to go." Kale looked up at Nathan, his eyes wide. "Thank you for helping us." Nathan's chest tightened at the boy's words. He forced a small smile. "Don't thank me yet. We're not out of the woods." Kale tilted his head, curiosity shining through his fear. "Do you think my dad would be proud of me?" Valsera froze, her heart breaking at the question. Nathan crouched down to Kale's level, his voice steady but kind. "Yeah, kid. I think he'd be proud of how brave you've been." Kale smiled faintly and leaned against his mother. Nathan stood and returned to the controls, his mind made up. He didn't know what the future held, but for now, he had a mission: to protect the widow and her son, no matter the cost. The final confrontation. The Echo Runner hurtled through space, its engines groaning under the strain of sustained travel. Nathan sat in the cockpit, his hands gripping the controls tightly as he glanced at the radar. The resistance outpost was close, just a few hours away, but the nagging feeling in his gut told him they wouldn't make it without another fight. "Something's wrong," Nathan muttered under his breath, his eyes scanning the sensors. The emptiness of the sector around them felt unnatural, like the calm before a storm. Valsera entered the cockpit, her expression cautious. "You've been quiet," she said, sitting in the co-pilot's seat. "What's bothering you?" Nathan gestured to the radar. "This sector should be crawling with trade ships, pirates, someone. But there's nothing. Either we got lucky, or they're waiting for us." Valsera's heart sank. "What do we do?" Nathan's lips pressed into a thin line. "We keep moving. But get ready. If they're out there, they'll hit us before we reach the outpost." The ambush. Nathan's instincts were right. Less than an hour later, the radar lit up with multiple signatures closing in fast. The Echo Runner shuddered as the first barrage of plasma fire struck its shields. "They're here," Nathan shouted, yanking the controls to evade the attack. 3 sleek fighter ships and a larger cruiser appeared on the viewport, their weapons glowing ominously. Valsera grabbed the intercom and called out to Kale in the cargo hold. "Kale, stay where you are. Don't move." Nathan cursed under his breath as the Echo Runner dodged another blast. They brought a cruiser. "Great. We're definitely outgunned." "Can we outrun them?" Valsera asked, gripping the edge of her seat. "Not a chance," Nathan replied. "That cruiser will catch us in minutes. Our only option is to fight." Valsera's eyes widened. "Fight? In this ship?" Nathan smirked grimly. "Trust me, I've been in worse situations. A desperate battle." Nathan activated the Echo Runner's remaining weapon systems, the rear cannon swiveling to face the pursuing fighters. His fingers flew across the controls, firing bursts of energy that narrowly missed their targets. The fighters responded with precision strikes, each one rocking the ship violently. The larger cruiser closed in, its presence looming like a predator stalking its prey. Nathan knew they wouldn't last long under its firepower. He needed a plan, and fast. "Valsera, take the secondary controls." Nathan barked. "I need you to manage the shield outputs. Divert power where I tell you." She hesitated for a moment before sliding into the co-pilot's chair, her hands shaking slightly as she followed his instructions. "What's the plan?" Nathan grinned, though there was little humor in it. "We're going to even the odds." He guided the Echo Runner into a dense asteroid field, the jagged rocks providing some cover from the enemy fire. The smaller fighters followed closely, weaving through the obstacles with ease. Nathan banked hard, forcing one of the fighters into a collision with an asteroid. The explosion lit up the field, but the remaining 2 fighters stayed on his tail. The cruiser, too large to navigate the field, hung back and unleashed long-range missiles. Nathan swerved desperately, the missiles grazing the ship's shields. "This is insane," Valsera shouted, her hands gripping the controls. "Welcome to my life," Nathan replied, sweat dripping down his brow. The turning point. As the Echo Runner danced through the asteroid field, Nathan spotted an opportunity. A massive asteroid with a hollowed-out core. He steered the ship toward it, his mind racing. "We're going inside," he said. Valsera's eyes widened. "Inside? We'll get trapped." "Exactly," Nathan replied, a glint of determination in his eyes. "But so will they." The Echo Runner slipped into the asteroid's cavernous interior, its lights illuminating the jagged walls. The 2 remaining fighters followed, their pilots determined to finish the job. Nathan gritted his teeth as he guided the ship through the narrow passages, the walls so close they scraped the Echo Runner's hull. "Hold on," Nathan yelled as he spun the ship into a tight loop, firing the rear cannons. One of the fighters exploded in a fiery burst, the debris scattering through the cavern. The final fighter was more cautious, hanging back to avoid the same fate. Nathan slowed the Echo Runner, allowing the pursuer to close the gap. As soon as it did, He activated the ship's last remaining trick, a powerful electromagnetic pulse. The blast disabled the fighter's systems, sending it spiraling into the cavern walls. Facing the cruiser, Nathan guided the Echo Runner out of the asteroid, but the relief was short-lived. The cruiser was waiting for them, its massive cannons charging for a final strike. "We're out of options," Nathan muttered, his voice laced with exhaustion. Valsera's eyes darted to the radar. "The Resistance. They're here." Out of hyperspace, a fleet of Resistance ships appeared, their weapons trained on the cruiser. The comm system crackled to life. "This is Captain Torin of the Resistance fleet. Stand down, or you will be destroyed." The cruiser hesitated, its cannons powering down as the Resistance ships surrounded it. Nathan slumped in his seat, his body finally relaxing. "About time," he muttered. The aftermath. The Echo Runner docked with the Resistance flagship, its battered hull a testament to the ordeal it had survived. Nathan, Valsera, and Kale were escorted to the ship's main chamber, where Captain Torin awaited them. "You've done a brave thing, smuggler," Torin said, his tone both respectful and cautious. "But this fight is far from over." Nathan nodded. "I figured as much. But for now, they're safe. That's all that matters." Valsera stepped forward, her eyes meeting Nathan's. "You've given us a chance, Nathan. I don't know how to thank you." He shrugged, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Just keep the kid safe. That's thanks enough." As the Resistance began preparing for their next move, Nathan walked back to the Echo Runner, his thoughts heavy. He wasn't a hero, but for the first time in years, he felt like he had done something that mattered. A new beginning. The Echo Runner sat docked in the bustling hangar of the Resistance flagship, its scorched hull bearing the scars of battle. Nathan leaned against the ship's ramp, his arms crossed as he watched Valsera and Kale interact with the Resistance fighters. Kale's wide eyes sparkled as a young soldier handed him a ration pack, showing him how to open it. Valsera, though clearly exhausted, spoke with Captain Torin, her body language exuding both relief and determination. Nathan sighed, running a hand through his messy hair. The weight of the past few days was finally catching up to him. He had done what he set out to do, deliver Valsera and her son to safety. The Resistance would protect them now, or at least give them a fighting chance. But as he watched them from afar, a strange feeling gnawed at him. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like running. A difficult decision. Captain Torin approached Nathan, his boots echoing on the metal floor. "You're free to go, smuggler. Your debt to them is paid," he said, his tone neutral but not unkind. Nathan nodded. "Yeah, I figured. My ship's barely holding together, but it'll get me out of here." Torin studied him for a moment. "You could stay, you know. We could use someone like you, a pilot with nerves of steel and a knack for survival." Nathan smirked. "I'm not a soldier, Captain. I'm a guy who got dragged into a fight that wasn't his. Besides, I've got my own problems to deal with." Torin tilted his head. "Maybe. But from what I've seen, you care more than you let on. And people like you don't get many chances to make a difference." Nathan didn't respond, his gaze drifting back to Valsera and Kale. The boy was laughing now, a sound so pure and full of life it caught Nathan off guard. He clenched his jaw, pushing down the wave of emotion rising in his chest. A mother's gratitude. Later, Valsera found Nathan sitting on a crate near his ship, staring at a faded photograph he always kept in his jacket. She approached quietly, her steps soft but deliberate. "You're leaving," she said, not as a question but a statement. Nathan looked up, his expression unreadable. That was the plan. Valsera sat beside him, her hands clasped in her lap. "I don't know how to thank you for what you've done. You gave us a chance when no one else would." Nathan shook his head. "I didn't do it for thanks. I just couldn't stand by and let it happen." She placed a hand on his arm, her touch light but steady. "Kale sees you as a hero, you know. He talks about you like you're some kind of legend." Nathan chuckled, though the sound was hollow. "I'm no hero. I'm just a guy trying to outrun his past. Valsera looked at him, her amber eyes filled with a mix of understanding and something else. Hope. Maybe it's time to stop running. Cal's farewell. As Nathan prepared the Echo Runner for departure, Cal ran up the ramp, his small feet echoing on the metal. Are you really going? He asked, his voice trembling. Nathan crouched down to the boy's level, forcing a small smile. Yeah, kid. It's time for me to move on. Cal frowned, his eyes welling up with tears. But what if the bad guys come back? What if they hurt Mom? Nathan's chest tightened at the boy's words. He rested a hand on Cal's shoulder. Your mom's stronger than you think, and the resistance will protect you. Cal sniffled, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. Will I ever see you again? Nathan hesitated, his throat tightening. I don't know, Cal. But no matter what, you keep being brave. Your mom needs you. Cal nodded, though his tears still fell. He threw his arms around Nathan's neck, hugging him tightly. Nathan froze for a moment before wrapping his arms around the boy, his heart aching in a way he hadn't felt in years. The unexpected choice. As Nathan watched Valsera and Cal from the cockpit, his hands rested on the ship's controls. The engines roared to life, the Echo Runner vibrating beneath him. But something held him back. He stared at the photo on his dashboard, the one of his wife and daughter. Their faces smiled back at him, a painful reminder of everything he had lost. He thought about Cal's laughter, Valsera's quiet strength, and the way they had looked at him, not as a smuggler, but as someone who mattered. For the first time, he realized he didn't want to be alone anymore. He didn't want to keep running. Nathan slammed the controls, shutting down the engines. He grabbed his jacket and stepped off the ship, his boots echoing loudly as he walked back into the hangar. Valsera looked up, surprised to see him. Nathan. He shrugged, a small smile tugging at his lips. Guess I'm not going anywhere just yet. Cal's face lit up, and he ran toward Nathan, wrapping his arms around his waist. You're staying. Nathan ruffled the boy's hair. Yeah, kid. Someone's got to keep an eye on you too. A new family. As the days passed, Nathan found himself becoming part of the resistance. He wasn't a soldier, but his experience as a pilot and his ability to think on his feet made him invaluable. More than that, he found a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in years. Cal began to see him as a father figure, often following him around the base and peppering him with questions. Valsera, too, grew closer to him, their bond deepening as they worked together to protect Cal and prepare for the fight ahead. One evening, as the three of them sat together in a quiet corner of the base, Cal leaned against Nathan's side, his voice sleepy but content. You're not going to leave, right? Nathan glanced at Valsera, who smiled softly. He wrapped an arm around the boy, his voice steady. Not a chance, kid. I'm right where I need to be. As the stars shone brightly outside the resistance base, Nathan felt something he hadn't in years. Peace. He had found a family again. And this time, he wasn't going to let it slip away.